Well, welcome back to Allison Customs Project Car TV. Today I'm working on the Mustang again, and my goal, hopefully I get more than this done, but my goal for the most part is to get this rear axle reassembled, the brakes on it, and get the brake lines and all that stuff together. We'll see how far I get on all of that. But so that the housing is bolted to the springs. When I had the rear housing powder coated, they had to knock the studs out. They didn't have a cover that would fit this particular rear axle. It's an 8-inch rear axle back in '67. So we've got to pull the studs in. I put them in and then tapped them a little bit with a hammer from the backside. And all I need to really do is I've got a nut here that's the fine thread. So throw a couple of flat washers on there so that we can run that nut down and just suck those in a little bit. They don't have to be 100% seated right away, because once we put the differential in there, they'll get sucked up tight anyway at that point. So we just need to make sure we're not going to knock one out while we're putting the differential in, because then we've got to take it all apart and start over. Once that's done, we'll get the differential mounted. Gasket showed up last night, so that's the reason today's project. And then we need to put axle seals into the tubes. We need to press the new bearings and bushings on the axles, and with that take the old bearings off. And then with those done, we can slide the axles in, bolt them up, and get the brakes, because it does have disc brakes on the rear end. So we'll get the bracket mounted up for the disc brakes. Okay, with the nut on there and all that, got a 9/16 inch socket. And we're gonna run that. As soon as it starts to get tight, I just back off. There's no sense damaging the threads or stretching the stud out any more than necessary. And you can see it doesn't take very long. Can easily be done with just a ratchet or a open, box end wrench even, but these are a little quicker. Alright, well, I'm going to turn you off and we'll come back when I got a little more done. I'll put another thin layer of sealant on there. That's all it needs. You don't need a big goopy mess of silicone running all the way around the thing. It's not going to do anything but make a mess. And typically what happens is when you put a big thick bead on there and it spooges to the inside, and then it ends up in your oil anyway, and your gears, and if it's on your engine, it ends up inside the engine somewhere. So just take it easy with this stuff. Some gasket manufacturers will tell you they don't need it at all. I find that it works better if you do put a thin coat on. And with that coat done, we are going to go get the center section, put that up there. Now they're heavy, so as we're doing this center section, don't be afraid to get some help, or I'm going to be using this jack that's back here behind us. Like I said, these center sections are heavy, so I've got mine sitting on this jack stand. And I'll rotate the jack. If you're doing this on the ground, it's completely doable. Just set this on your floor jack. Probably even a little easier. Just would not be easy for me to film for you. And I say it'd be easier because your floor jack typically has wheels on it. And this jack that we're using right now does not. Let's get a few nuts and washers started just so we don't have, it's not, I mean, the fact is it ain't coming back off easily. It's always good to be sure. The only thing is we've got enough thread all the way around on these now. We can use our socket wrench or the electric ratchet we were using earlier. We can start snugging these down and just pulling them into place. Now I am reusing the studs that were already in the axle, but these are new bearings and washers. Aren't new bearings, new nuts and washers. The axle house or the differential housing has been powder coated to match the factory colors for that time, for the time frame. And then we've got new gears in there, a new differential that is that actually just went on by hand. Just wiggling it a little more. So we've got new gears, new differential that's a limited slip. And we set the gears, picked a gear ratio that is much closer to what the factory 90s Mustang that the engine and transmission came out of would have had, and we had to take into consideration our tire size. So with those things considered, we should have a really nice combination now as far as acceleration and shifting points and that kind of thing. So let me get my socket and let's run these on. First up, we can get a torque wrench, torque these down, and then I always take a red paint pen, and once everything I know is torqued correctly, then I put a little red dot on there so that I know it's been done and I don't need to go back over it again later. I'm wondering if I got everything done correctly. So I'll wipe off a little bit of excess silicone that squeezed out, but see we have very little squeezing out, and that's what we want, just enough to seal it, but we don't want a big mess of it on the inside or the outside. Okay, now the book answer is that these should be torqued 25 to 40 foot-pounds of torque. So I'm going to do it in two turns, and I'm going to set them 25 the first time around, then I'll come back and probably set them to 35 the second time around, because I don't really see any reason in just maxing them out just to max out. So we're just going to try and come up with an alternating pattern here. Okay, so that's 25. Do the same thing again at 35, and then we'll call it good. And then we're going to go around one more time just to verify everything is where it should be. Didn't add any more torque. Okay, now this pinion cover is 35 to 45, and all I'm going to do, I set my torque wrench at 40, and as long as they all go to 40, I know that nothing needs to change on that. And we don't don't need to do anything. So that's it. Let's move on to the next part. As part of this project to put the rear axle together, we need to press off the old wheel bearings and then press on some new ones. And what I've got here is just a piece of scrap metal that was actually laying on the table where I was practicing a different project. And so I just had it come through, cut out a couple notches on each side for the uprights, and cut us out a U shape for the axle to slide into. And then this is 1/4 inch, but if you try and I did try, if you try and press the bearing out with just the 1/4, it just flexes, which makes sense. There's, you know, basically you only have this much space over here preventing that, and then it's got all these cuts and stuff in it. So I used my plasma table to cut it. Obviously that's not the important part. You could cut it with a hacksaw or whatever, just quicker on the table. So I've come back and I put 2 pieces of angle iron on each side. Again, these are just in the scrap pile. And I've got the pins for the carriage down here, and then I've slid the carriage up out of the way and just stuck some more scrap metal through the holes just to keep it up and out of the way. So right now we've got the axle lined up with the hydraulic press jack. You can see the carriage here is out of the way now. Everything's lined up. We're gonna run the press down and press that bearing off the axle. We need to press it about 1/4 inch before it gets to gets to an area that's reduced in size. So, and then the axle, or the bearing is this is a new one. So the bearing is roughly 3/4 inch thick. So we got a little bit of work to do, but it should go pretty quickly here. Let's give it a shot. Well, we're even bending that. All right, let me back this off. All right. I added a little more bracing down there at the bottom. It's a little more bracing, so let's see if this will get us taken care of here. Nope. Okay, well, we've added a little more bracing. I had some 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch thick 4x4 angle, so threw a piece of that on each side, and then just underneath everything, just kind of giving it a little more mass. So hopefully that'll keep it from flexing too much. Let's see what we get. And that ain't working either. Alright, well, changed up my bracketing again, and let's see if this will provide enough strength. That's working. Was enough. So we have our bearing and our bushing. Those are off. So we're going to knock the other axle and bushing, or take the other axle, do the same process. So we'll get the other axle out and press off the bearing and the bushing on that one. Then we can press on the new ones to the axles. We'll kind of rearrange all of our setup here. But give me just a minute. I'll get this axle out and the other one in. We now know how much it's going to take to give us the right clearance, so shouldn't take very long. There we go. Bearing and the bushing all cleaned off, or all pulled off, pressed off. Just step that out of the way. Okay, so I took doing the long side axle first, which is also the first one we pressed off, and I just ran over and used a wire wheel on the backside there. I did not come up with a wire wheel up on the axle shaft itself, like where the bearing and all that has to rest. I just was trying to get surface rust and gunk off the actual flange. I also did this side a little bit, but pretty much all you can do is the outside edge. So I cleaned it up a little bit with some brake cleaner. And we got our new bearing and our new bushing. We'll slide those on. The bushing is just small enough to fit through the smaller hole in these plates. So there we go. Fits in the V pretty well. What would really be ideal is if we have a plate with exactly with just a hole a little larger than the axle shaft. So let me see what I can find on that. Okay, I know I'm being overly anal here about how closely everything fits. And just to give you an idea of what I'm looking at is, even with those lined up, this bushing just barely catches all four sides of that. So all I did was make a plate that we can now put the different pieces on. Just set these and this. And the only reason to really do that is just so you don't mark up the bushing unnecessarily. So otherwise, like I said, I'm just being overly pain in the butt. Need something to press down on there, or what we could do is just raise this up. I set it down that low so that it'd be easier to put the axle in and out, but not really necessary. Alright, and then use looking for something I can lay across the axle. There's there. There we go. There we go. Nice and snug right on the flange. You see the bearings on, nice and good. Didn't make any extra marks in the bushing, so I like it. Alright, here's the short side shaft, and we're going to put the new bearing on it. Put our new bushing. Do the plate. Everything's tight together. Centered under the jack, under the press. Something like that. Nice new bearing. Cleaned up the backside again with a wire wheel. We're going to take these and go get them installed in the axle housing. Alright, so we're ready to put the axle seals in. And there's a little lip all the way at the back there that this can ride against. I've put a little silicone, just a real light smear again. And the goal here is put that in about as square as you can, and then find something approximately the same diameter. I'm using one of one of my lift, my 2-post lift. It's a arm, an extension for the arm there. A socket, buy a dedicated seal installer kit. Doesn't really matter, just as long as rip off the extra silicone again, and we can put our bearings, our axles in, and then keepers and the retainers. So, and then when you go to put your axle in, you just need to put a little bit of oil on the seal so that the axle will slide in there and not damage anything. So that's actually the next step. I'm going to grab a little oil and the axle and we'll put this in here. Okay, so we're on to the next step. We need to install our caliper bracket, which also includes the drum brake, the parking drum brake. We have a retainer for the axle, and then the axle itself. I've squirted a little oil in here on the seal. Also put a little bit on the axle itself so that as it slides in, it's not tearing that seal. And it's kind of all of got a lot of little moving pieces here all at once, so just gotta get everything threaded together. Try not to let the axle ride on the seal as much as you possibly can. Once you get it to set in there, get all the pieces in there. And you're just basically tapping the bearing into the axle housing. So it bottoms out. And then we've got 4 bolts to install. And so what this hole right here in the axle flange is for is to get to them. So we're using the bolts, which have this flange on them. I did put them on the wire wheel to try and clean them up a little bit. And then, of course, this had a really bad axle seal leaks on both sides before. So I've spent quite a bit of time, probably a good half hour, cleaning all the oil and grease out of these parking brake assembly and all the brackets and everything. So we're going to line this up, find the hole in the axle flange. Axle retainer lines up roughly where it's supposed to go. There we go. There's the first one lined up. And then I just use a short socket, in this case it's 9/16 with a long extension, drop the nut in there and hold the backside. You should be able to at least get the nut started. And you're going to rotate the axle to the next bolt hole. That same process. And rotate again. And all we're trying to do here is just get the nuts started. We're not trying to tighten anything down yet. Just want everything held in place. With all those in, now we'll come back with a ratchet and just snug them down. So now we can go get a torque wrench and tighten these up to their spec. So kind of like before, we're going to do this in 2 sequences, and these are 20 to 40 foot-pounds of torque. The lowest this particular wrench will go to is 25, so we're going to do the first turn at 25, and they'll come back at 35. There you go, that was 20. So that's it for this side. We can. The rotors are filthy. I worked on them for a while. We'll do some more cleaning on those, and we can slide the rotors on. But before I get to the rotor, I'm actually going to go ahead and install my brake line and my sway bar, my rear sway bar. So we'll get those 2 items on, then we'll do the rotors, the calipers, and the rear tires.
Thanks for watching Allison Customs Project Car TV. Like us on Facebook and check us out at AllisonCustomsOnline.com.